first of all, my name's Andrew Walser, because I know some of you don't know me. My mother, Nancy, is Arden's sister. And before I say anything about my father, who died on March 13th this year, I did want to say, I was talking to my various cousins and all about how I hadn't seen any of them in, 23 years? Yeah. Is the right number, right? And in some cases longer than that. And a lot of my memories of Arden and John are from childhood as well. And I think with like the kind of infallible sense of childhood, what I took away from them was just kindness and good nature. That's the aura around them when I was a kid is overwhelming, really. That's what I think about. And so I'm remembering a lot of that as I heard the various reminiscences today. So I appreciated that reminder. My father, as I said, he died a couple months ago now. On the one hand, it wasn't a surprise. He'd had a lot of physical complaints in his last couple years. He wasn't young. He was a proud smoker. I guess you could call a proud and even defiant smoker. But it nonetheless was kind of completely unexpected for me. And I was trying to think, well, why would that be so unexpected? Why would it be such a surprise? And I think it's because he was just the steadiest person I've ever met. Like the most reliable, steady man I've ever met. You could just count on my father. That's what I think really distinguished him. When I think back on him, from my childhood onward, one thing I always think about is work. That was a big part of his life, is work. And he started out at a company called Bacon Whipple. Started at the bottom, as the song says, and and worked his way up. And at the time when I was growing up, I don't think I really realized how hard he worked and how much he did, because I knew that he would leave early before I got up, and I knew that he would get back late, so that we're used to eating at 7:30 or 8, right? But it didn't even occur to me at the time that he was also first on the school board as a regular school board member, kind of a force of professionalism and common sense against zealotry and things like that. And that he later was on the Police and Fire Commission as well, just taking seriously his duty to his community.
And he coached you guys.
Yeah, he had time to coach our Park District basketball teams, even though he himself was, I think, the worst basketball player in the family. But he still coached our teams, and he did a good job at it.
I understand he had season tickets to the Bulls when the Bulls were not so good.
Back
in the day.
That's right. He got those.
He liked basketball.
35 years
he loved
older.
it.
He loved basketball.
Yeah, he loved it.
He's a real record keeper as well. So he would be out every night during the sports, and he'd keep what was the final score of the Bulls game. He'd write it down. So he had a log of scores. He was also another thing that really defined him, of course, and I heard this a lot with the reminiscences of John, is cars. He really loved cars, and that's something he very much. He used to race cars, minis, Jabros, things like that, and. He passed on his love of cars, I think, to my brother Carl and my brother John in particular. Missed me entirely. so I can, that's a red car, right? And that's about the limit I could go for. So
he's not kidding.
Yeah, that's right. But,
I know more about cars
when we were at my parents' old house cleaning it up, I noticed that my nephew Kevin was in the garage in awe of my dad's tools, of the car out there. I was just really impressed. And then I saw that Emma, my niece, had posted something, had found some old thing about my dad's racing Jabros online, and was really impressed and thrilled by it. So I think the legacy goes on without me, to those kids. My dad's demeanor, he was not a demonstrative man. And in fact, when my sister Laura, with whom my mom lives now. When my sister Laura was, high school age, late teenage, early 20s, she hung around with a lot of people who other people found scary. Right? There are a lot of mohawks and piercings and a lot of black clothes and Doc Martens and things like that, right? Not that they were, but a lot of people found them that way. The thing is across the board, every one of her friends was terrified of my father. It's because my father had a professional level, extra strength, supercharged scowl that would just terrify these kids. But in fact, once they got to know him, they'd realize that he was actually a pretty nice guy, right? But he had that impressive scowl. When I think about him in what he called his den, which was the room off our kitchen, and it was sort of he would sit at his desk surrounded by the things. First of all, he'd be working at his desk. That would be key, doing paperwork, things like that. He would have things like an adding machine and an old typewriter, things like that. He would have a huge wall of books behind him. Now, as it turns out, I don't think he had a lot of time for reading in my teenage years or my adult life. My mom was the one who was constantly reading, right? But I nonetheless think that between the two of them, we picked up from you the constant habit of reading. And my dad, just that wall of books, I think, was a kind of something that really impressed my brothers and my sister. He had his WFMT, the Chicago classical radio station, on very quietly in the background, almost subliminally. And then he had his old jazz records across the way. And then there's a whole wall of models and trophies. As I said, he used to race cars, and his trophies are now dispersed among various people in the family because everyone wanted one or two. And his models made me think of something that we recently discovered. As I was trying to get a sense of my dad as a teenager, before I would have known him, of course, is he apparently, you can find this on Amazon. He and his friends apparently wrote a rule book for some naval warship game.
I remember him playing that.
Yeah, I can't remember the name now, but he was very, very passionate about it. So I realized now he was a gamer. He was a gamer, ahead of his time, right? Working with the limited technology of those ancient days.
Something to do with sinking the Bismarck, I think.
That's right.
But he played that when I was a little kid, and we would come to the apartment in Chicago. He was still playing it with adult friends.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. He really kept.
He really was a
that.
gamer.
Yeah, he was through and through. In fact, his dedication to work. One of the speakers mentioned how much John loved to plan, and that reminded me very much of my father. As my mom knows, and actually, Jamie knows too, is that if we were to go on vacation, when you guys went on your drives along the Mississippi, it was sort of scheduled down to 45-minute blocks, right? It is very carefully scheduled. And when we drove out west a couple times, every hotel was planned. He knew the 7 attractions on either side of the highway. He was very meticulous about his planning.
A large ball of string.
Yeah, unfortunately, no ball of string, but other things. From him and my mom, I think one thing I picked up unconsciously was just that they were really great parents. And I obviously, when I was a kid, I knew they were my parents, but I wasn't in a really evaluative mode, right? I just know, hey, I love my parents. But I think I was old enough by the time my sister Laura was born that I kind of could see you guys parenting and the combination of sort of love and latitude, right? The love was unquestionable, but the latitude to do your own thing too, I think has been very important to all of us. And I think if, in addition to help from Jamie, if I've been at all good with May or Hannah, it's thanks to you and to Dad.
Well, and I think in terms of Hannah, I think, the first how many years of her life, she was raised by your mom.
Yes, obviously my mom gets like extra credit for Hannah, not deflected, but firsthand. And speaking of that, Hannah changed her Facebook profile picture recently to a picture of her with my dad. I think it was when she was going away to the University of Chicago, where my dad had briefly attended when he was a young man. And the thing is my dad, I mentioned his imposing skull, my dad is smiling, and it's a big smile. And my sister said, how did you get him to smile? That was the question. And I think what it was is, first of all, he was deeply proud of his kids, and of his grandkids, very, very much so. And this other thing that Hannah told me is that he was smiling in the direction of my mom. That she was the one off camera that he was looking at, and that's where that big smile came from. And that's kind of like how I most remember him, right like that, looking at his wife with adoration and love. I miss him already, and I'm going to continue missing him. But I also feel, and I'm sure Bob and Kathy and Susan and Henry feel this too, it's like there are traces of your parents everywhere, and there are traces in you, and there's probably traces in my dad and how I delivered this eulogy. and so I miss him, but I'm also reminded of him every day and glad I am. So thank you.